The Vatican is in turmoil. Social media is ablaze. Lines have been drawn, sides taken, and passions ignited. Some are cheering with a renewed sense of hope, others are furious, condemning what they believe to be a step too far. The man at the center of this whirlwind? Pope Leo XIV. His recent statements have sent shockwaves through not only the Catholic Church but also global religious and political communities. It's not often that a papal speech makes international headlines, and even less often that it becomes a lightning rod of controversy. So, what exactly did Pope Leo XIV say that has everyone talking? Let's take a deep breath and dive into the storm. To understand the magnitude of what's happening, you first have to understand the context. Pope Leo XIV hasn't said anything heretical or unprecedented. In fact, much of his message is deeply rooted in traditional Catholic doctrine. But that's precisely what's caused the uproar. In a world where ambiguity is often prized, and compromise is the currency of diplomacy, Pope Leo has chosen to speak with clarity. And that clarity has unsettled many. He began his now famous address with a topic that should have seemed benign, family. But the way he approached it was anything but neutral. Using the Church's traditional language, he described the family as a stable union between a man and a woman. No euphemisms. No modern rewordings. No parent one or parent two. Just the ancient, unaltered vision of the family as taught by the Church for 2,000 years. And just like that, the internet lit up. Critics accused him of being out of touch, insensitive, even dangerous. Supporters, however, saw it as a long overdue return to foundational values. Yet Pope Leo didn't stop there. He moved on to human dignity, a topic that has always been central to papal discourse. But again, it was the way he framed it that shocked people. Rather than focusing on politically convenient talking points, he emphasized those whom society often forgets: the unborn, the elderly abandoned in nursing homes, the sick, the mentally ill, and the spiritually lost. His focus wasn't on what would win applause at a United Nations conference. It was on those who suffer quietly, invisibly, often without advocates. He called for a renewed commitment to defending life in all its stages, from conception to natural death. For many Catholics, this was nothing new. For the world at large, however, it came as a wake-up call, and not a welcome one. The turning point came during his first major speech to Vatican diplomats, the representatives of the Holy See to governments around the globe. In that moment, Pope Leo dropped a line that would reverberate through newsrooms and social feeds for days: the truth is not an abstract concept but a person, Jesus Christ. To secular ears, it might have sounded like routine religious rhetoric. But in church politics, it was nothing short of explosive. For years, many inside the Church had favored a more diplomatic approach, one that emphasized dialogue and compromise over firm assertions of truth. Pope Leo rejected that approach outright. For him, truth isn't something you negotiate. It's not a consensus. It's Christ. Period. That statement drew praise from traditionalist Catholics who felt that the Church had drifted too far from its roots. Finally, they said, a pope who speaks plainly, who draws from the well of Christian tradition without apology. But others were outraged. Progressive voices within the Church and outside of it accused Pope Leo of turning back the clock, of reversing decades of reform, of making the Church less inclusive. But to Leo, this wasn't about politics, it was about returning to the essence of Christianity. Even ordinary Catholics were bewildered by the reactions. One particularly telling moment came when an 89-year-old grandmother, a devout Catholic, responded to the controversy with quiet astonishment. "That's just what we've always believed," she said. "Why is everyone so surprised?" Her words revealed the real crux of the matter. What used to be common, even expected, has now become controversial. In a world of shifting norms and diluted convictions, clarity itself has become a kind of rebellion. The Pope's address to Christian educators continued this trend. Speaking to those who shape the minds of the next generation, he started with optimism, celebrating the energy, creativity, and passion of youth. But then he took a sharp turn, addressing issues that many would prefer to ignore. He warned against superficial relationships, rampant individualism, and emotional instability. And, perhaps most provocatively, he condemned relativism, the idea that there is no objective truth, only subjective opinions. To Pope Leo, this is not just a philosophical error but a moral crisis. When truth becomes relative, he argued, society becomes governed not by principles but by volume, the loudest voice wins. Pope Benedict XVI once spoke of the dictatorship of relativism, and Pope Leo's words clearly echoed that warning. But this time, the words weren't coming from a former theology professor, they were coming from the Pope himself, speaking from the heart of the Vatican. The message was unmistakable: the Church cannot and will not abandon the idea of objective truth. Not now. Not ever. But Leo's boldness wasn't limited to his words. His actions have also spoken volumes. In his first major appointment, Pope Leo chose Father Miguel Angel Contreras, a relatively unknown young Peruvian bishop, for a prominent role. Father Contreras isn't a media figure. He doesn't have a social media following or a publicist. What he does have, however, is a reputation for holiness, prayer, and deep commitment to pastoral care. This choice sent a clear signal: Leo is not interested in celebrity bishops or bureaucratic clerics. He wants shepherds, not spiritual managers. He wants those who form souls, not chase influence. In a similar vein, Pope Leo rejected the modern, more modest papal residence in the Domus Sancti Marthi and moved back into the traditional papal apartments in the Apostolic Palace. Critics called it prideful, even regal. But Leo's move wasn't about luxury, it was about symbolism. The Pope, he seems to be saying, is not just another Vatican administrator. He is the successor of Peter, the rock upon which Christ built his church. And that role comes with a visible authority that should not be downplayed for the sake of modern optics. This dual strategy, returning to tradition while speaking directly to modern concerns, isn't random. It's calculated, and it reveals Leo's broader vision. For decades, many religious institutions, not just the Catholic Church, have tried to stay relevant by blending in. They've softened moral teachings, replaced theology with ideology, and prioritized popularity over principle. Pope Leo is now pushing back against that trend with full force. He seems to believe that this very strategy of accommodation is what has weakened the Church's moral authority. This isn't just nostalgia for the past. It's a diagnosis of the present. In Leo's view, compromise hasn't brought people closer to the Church, it's pushed them further away. By blurring its message to appeal to modern tastes, the Church has become less distinctive, less courageous, and less compelling. In contrast, Leo argues that people, especially young people, are hungering for clarity, for authenticity, for leaders who actually believe in what they preach. And he may be right. Recent studies suggest that while many young people are skeptical of institutional religion, they're also turned off by leaders who seem unsure, politically calculating, or overly diplomatic. They want truth, not trendiness. They respect integrity more than inclusivity. They're drawn not to institutions that mimic culture, but to those that challenge it. In this light, Pope Leo's approach, clear, unwavering, even confrontational, might be exactly what is needed to reignite interest in the faith. Interestingly, some of the loudest backlash to Pope Leo hasn't come from secularists or non-believers. It's come from within the Church itself. There's a faction of clergy and laity that for years has envisioned a new, more progressive Catholicism, one focused primarily on social issues like climate change, economic justice, and political activism. While those causes are not inherently opposed to Catholic teaching, Leo's critics often emphasize them while downplaying the supernatural claims of the faith, the divinity of Christ, the power of the sacraments, the reality of sin, the call to holiness. Leo is unapologetically reversing that emphasis. He's not abandoning concern for the poor or the planet, but he's recentering the Church on its primary message, that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the only Savior of humanity. Everything else flows from that central truth. Without it, Christianity becomes just another NGO, just another voice in the chorus of well-meaning social activism. With it, however, the Church becomes something radically different, a supernatural community with a divine mission. This is the choice Pope Leo is putting before the world. Is the Church a cultural participant, or is it a prophetic voice? Is it primarily an ethical institution, or is it a supernatural one? Does it exist to comfort the world, or to confront it? These are not abstract theological questions, they are questions with enormous implications for how the Church operates, whom it appoints, what it teaches, and how it engages with the modern world. History shows that this tension is not new. Past popes have faced similar crossroads. Pope Leo XIII wrestled with the challenges of industrialization and labor injustice, crafting the Church's first major social teaching document. Pope Pius X fought against the rise of modernist theology that threatened to undermine traditional doctrine. Pope Benedict XV guided the Church through World War I and emphasized theological clarity. Each of these pontiffs faced pressure to dilute or delay difficult teachings. And each, in their own way, chose fidelity over convenience. Now, Pope Leo XIV is standing in that same line. He sees the Church tempted once again to become too comfortable, too conformist, too cautious. And he's saying, no. The Church's mission is not to win applause, but to proclaim truth. Not to blend in, but to stand out. Not to survive, but to save. If he stays this course, and all indications are that he will, the Catholic Church could be heading into one of its most dramatic periods of transformation in decades. Not a transformation of doctrine, but a transformation of tone, focus, and spirit. A Church less obsessed with media praise and more committed to forming saints. A Church that doesn't hide behind vague statements but boldly proclaims its deepest truths. A Church that offers not what culture already believes, but what it desperately needs. This vision of the Church, resolute, unyielding, unapologetically Christ-centered, might seem bold or even naive to some. After all, we live in a time when institutions are expected to bend, to evolve, to follow the trends of the moment. Tradition is often portrayed as a burden, a relic of the past rather than a guiding light. And yet, here stands Pope Leo XIV, insisting that some things are not meant to change. That in a world starving for truth, consistency is not weakness, it is power. What makes this moment especially electric is the reaction it has sparked outside the Church. Even non-Catholics, even non-religious observers, are taking notice. Why? Because the spectacle of someone standing firm on principle, especially in a sea of cultural ambiguity, is rare. It's compelling. In some ways, it's revolutionary. When so many leaders hedge their words, hedge their beliefs, hedge their values, here is a man who says what he means and means what he says. That, in itself, is newsworthy. For too long, religious voices have sounded indistinguishable from political figures, vague, careful, evasive. Homilies and public statements have been sanitized to the point of spiritual emptiness. Pope Leo has shattered that pattern. His language is direct. His tone is confident. His message is unmistakable. And that clarity has become controversial not because it's extreme, but because it's rare. His emphasis on Jesus Christ as the center of everything is more than a doctrinal statement, it's a challenge to every other worldview. It says, in effect, that Christianity is not one option among many, not just a useful tradition or a helpful philosophy. It is either true or it is not. And if it is true, then it must take precedence over every other claim on our loyalty. That kind of exclusivity is deeply uncomfortable in an age that worships inclusivity. But Leo seems to understand that authentic faith doesn't begin with comfort, it begins with truth. The most surprising part of this moment might be the number of young people who are listening. Not all agree with Pope Leo, of course. Many strongly disagree. But they're paying attention. That alone says something. Because what young people often reject is not religious teaching per se, but the perception of hypocrisy, of weakness, of leaders who don't live what they preach. Leo's strength is that he lives what he says. His words match his actions. His priorities match his message. In a culture cynical about authority, that kind of integrity is magnetic, even if it's polarizing. So what happens now? That's the question everyone is asking. Will Pope Leo maintain this trajectory? Will he reshape the Church's culture from within? Will bishops follow his lead or resist it? Will he inspire a generation of priests and lay people to reclaim the deep, difficult beauty of Catholicism? Or will his efforts be sidelined by the institutional inertia that has plagued so many movements of renewal? Whatever the outcome, one thing is certain: the old paradigm is cracking. The idea that religious institutions must constantly update, dilute, and reinvent themselves to remain relevant is being called into question. Pope Leo is betting on the opposite, that timeless truth is more relevant than ever. That what people crave isn't another echo of the culture, but a countercultural voice, one rooted in something eternal. This is a moment of decision, not just for the Catholic Church, but for all religious communities. The fundamental question is universal: should faith traditions conform to the ever-changing values of society, or should they stand firm in their convictions, even when it's unpopular? Should institutions of belief become platforms for social commentary, or remain sanctuaries for spiritual truth? Pope Leo XIV has made his choice. And by doing so, he has forced everyone else to make theirs. No one can stay on the fence forever. Not Catholics. Not bishops. Not even outsiders watching from a distance. Because when someone declares, with total clarity, that the truth is not an idea, but a person, Jesus Christ, you have to respond. You either believe it, or you don't. You either follow, or you walk away. And maybe that's why this moment feels so important. Not because it marks the beginning of a new ideology, but because it reawakens something ancient. It invites a return to a kind of courage that once changed empires and converted nations. It's not the courage of violence or pride, but of conviction. Of knowing who you are, whom you serve, and what you stand for. So whether you're a believer or a skeptic, a cradle Catholic or someone who left the church long ago, this is a moment to reflect. What do you believe? What truths would you stand for, even if they cost you friends, popularity, or comfort? What kind of church, or world, do you want to live in? Because as Pope Leo XIV reminded us, in words that have rattled walls and pierced hearts, truth still matters. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we remembered that.